a seriously ill priest, confined to his home and unable even to celebrate Mass in public. No one imagined that he would put an archbishop in serious trouble with just 2 words: "I will not remain silent." Because that priest received a peremptory order: stop writing, a publication ban with the threat of sanctions up to and including suspension. His crime? Having spoken, in black and white, the truth about the Church's crisis and refusing to remain silent. By the end of this video, you'll understand who this man is, why his story is a reflection of what's happening in the Church today, and why his response left many speechless. But let's first understand who he is. He's not a troublemaker seeking visibility. He's an Austrian priest from the Archdiocese of Vienna, ordained in 2019. He comes from an ancient noble family, one of those who served the emperors, a cultured, studious man before becoming a priest. But his life bears a wound, a serious illness. He is so ill that he can no longer exercise public ministry. He doesn't preach in a parish. He doesn't hear confessions in queues of faithful. He celebrates Mass alone in the chapel of his home. From that solitude, however, he found a way to remain a priest, writing. He considers his articles, in his own words, "my form of pastoral care and preaching." A pulpit made of paper from his room. And in his writing, he said what few dare. He denounced the Church's decline, its doctrinal confusion, its advancing ambiguity, clearly, but from within, as a son of the Church. He was ordained by Cardinal Schönborn, the then Archbishop of Vienna, whom he deeply admires and describes as a gentleman of another era, capable of gentle correction. With him, he says, the dialogue was always humane. Then, in Vienna, everything changed. Schönborn was replaced by a new archbishop, Monsignor Grünwiedel, appointed by Leo. And with him, the priest says, came not very friendly letters with an old-fashioned authoritarian tone, until the decisive one, a curt publication ban, imposed from above. If you don't comply, this is the gist of it, you'll face sanctions, up to and including suspension. All of this, he emphasizes, without a proper conversation, without a discussion on the merits. No one even explained to him which witnesses were incriminated. And here's where the most burning paradox emerges. This man is a retired priest, without any duties, who has never received a salary from the Church. Attacking him, he says, only serves to make an example of him, due to his media presence. And there's a detail that borders on the absurd. More than a year ago, he says, the same archbishop had asked him, in the name of obedience, to pay the church tax in Germany. Confusing a request for money with obedience, he comments, is simply unacceptable. But it's his response that deserves to be heard. Because in the face of the threat, the priest didn't give in. He uttered a phrase that has already become a manifesto. He recalled a blessed priest, Rupert Mayer, who, under another tyranny, repeated, "I will not remain silent." And he added, "No priest should remain silent, least of all in the face of abuses in the Church today." This is no randomly chosen model. Father Mayer openly challenged Nazism and was persecuted for it. The Austrian priest identifies with that legacy, that of those who, faced with power, choose their conscience. Then he touched on the issue everyone would have raised. What about obedience? Every priest at ordination promises obedience to his bishop. Isn't it his duty to remain silent if the bishop ordains him? His answer is startlingly clear. Obedience, he says, is owed first and foremost to Christ in the Church, and it is never blind obedience. Anyone who interprets it that way is missing its meaning. A bishop who stifles freedom of speech today, he writes, will restrict other rights tomorrow. Where would that leave us? When obedience tramples on fundamental human rights, he warns, it becomes a form of spiritual abuse. On this point, in fairness, it must be said that canonists would have something to say. The Church is not a democracy, and a bishop does indeed have some authority over his priests, including their public writings. But the real issue isn't technical, it's the method, and above all, the double standard. And this is where the priest hits the nail on the head. Today, he writes, it has become common to impose bans on those who profess the faith of the Church, while critics of celibacy and heretics remain undisturbed and express themselves as they wish. Let's pause for a second, because that's all there is to it. A sick priest defending his timeless faith is threatened with suspension. Meanwhile, those who question doctrine write, speak, and teach untouched. It's the inverted image of a church that proclaims itself listening and open to all. Listening to whom? Open to whom? Not to those who preserve tradition, apparently. And precisely on the symbolic word of these years, synodality, the priest is blunt. No one, he says, really knows what it is. He calls it, these are his strong words, a way to introduce foreign ideas into the Church, passing them off as Catholic. And he denounces the contradiction, a church that claims to listen to everyone, but silences precisely those who remain faithful. The proof that this is a lie, he writes, is my own case. It's hard to disagree with him, faced with a letter urging him to keep quiet. Then there's the defense of the ancient Mass, which he discovered, he says, precisely by opposing the bans of recent years. In that liturgy, he says, he rediscovered the Catholic faith in its purest form. The priest does not spare harsh words, going so far as to say that the Church is completing a disaster and that its true leader is not the Pope, but Christ. A clarification is necessary here, and it is our position. These are very strong words, which we report as his. We do not agree with their tone, because the Pope remains the Pope, and the Church belongs to Christ through Peter, not against Peter. One important thing must be added in his favor. This man is not a sedevacantist. He recognizes the Pope, celebrates Mass, and has promised obedience to Christ in his Church. He doesn't want to leave. He wants to stay and remain faithful. And even purged of excesses, one fact remains that no one can deny. A sick but faithful pastor is treated as a problem to be silenced, and not as a son to be listened to. So what does this story teach us, those of us who are watching from the outside? It teaches us that courage in the Church is not dead, that there are still those who, sick and alone, prefer to risk suspension rather than betray their conscience. Christ is my judge, they say, no one else. He also reminds us of an ancient and comforting truth, which he himself recalls. One is a priest forever. No letter, no decree, no sanction can cancel the sacrament. And the sacraments that priest celebrates remain valid always. But above all, this story asks us something concrete, not just to be outraged, but to pray for this priest alone in his room, and also for his bishop and for the Pope, that the Church may once again listen to her faithful children rather than fear them. Because a Church that silences its faithful children and tolerates their errors doesn't grow stronger, it grows more isolated. And the voice of an elderly, ailing priest whispering, "I will not be silent," can be worth more than 1,000 documents written to say nothing. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment Amen. God bless you.